Quickly, before we dive in today, I've built a free tool called the Speaking Fee Audit. Take a minute and try it if you haven't already. Most speakers have a nagging sense that they're undercharging, but no way to benchmark it. This takes about a minute, tells you where your fee sits against what speakers at your level command, and shows you the specific leaks costing you bookings and income. It's completely free, and the link is presentinfluence.com/speaking fee quiz, all one word, or click the link in the show notes. Let's get on with the show. There's a version of your speaking business that feels completely logical from the inside and is almost completely invisible from the outside. You've got a topic you believe in. You know your stuff. You're a decent speaker, maybe even a great one, and yet the bookings aren't coming, or they're not coming at the rate or the fee that you think you deserve. Here's what I want to offer you today. The problem probably isn't your speaking, it's your positioning. And more specifically, it's the fact that your positioning was built around what you want to say rather than what the market actually wants or needs to hear. So stay with me on this, because by the end of this episode, I'm going to give you a framework for diagnosing exactly where your positioning is leaking. And I'm going to be doing a live event on this very topic that you're going to want to know about. So more on that later. Welcome to Professional Speaking, the show for people who are serious about speaking and being known, booked, and paid. My name is John Ball, professional speaker coach, keynote speaker, stand-up comedian, sci-fi nerd, and your guide on the journey to a thriving speaking business. Let me start today with a story that I think is going to make a few of you uncomfortable. Not because it's about you, but because it's so close to you that you'll likely recognize the thinking. I came across a speaker who wanted to take a weight loss topic into the corporate market. Now, her reasoning was completely logical. Health affects productivity, productivity affects the bottom line. Therefore, companies should care about helping their employees to become healthier and lose weight. Sound argument, right? Pretty solid. Here's what the market heard. They heard a speaker who would stand in front of a room full of employees and deliver a talk where it would be immediately, visually obvious who the talk was aimed at. You can't make a room full of people feel included in a weight loss conversation when some of those people are going to feel singled out, othered, and frankly, humiliated, embarrassed at the least by being in that room. Corporate HR teams, legal teams, leadership teams would not touch it, not because health doesn't matter, but because the framing created a liability rather than a solution. Now, that speaker wasn't wrong about health and productivity being connected. She was wrong about the market, though, and what the market would actually buy, and why. She built her positioning from the inside out, from what she wanted to say, rather than from the outside in, from what the buyer could actually use. This is the topic trap, and it catches a lot of speakers who are smart, well-intentioned, and genuinely expert in what they do. The question that you need to be asking isn't, what do I know that I can take to the market? It's more, what do buyers need? What are the problems that they have that I'm in a position to solve? Those are very different questions. The first one is about you. The second one is about the transactions that get you booked. The topic itself is not your positioning. The topic is the raw material. Positioning is what you build from it that makes a buyer say yes. Lovely, lovely client. She had written a book, a genuinely good book, packed with research, frameworks, practical tools. Honestly, great book. And then she started speaking, and she did what felt completely natural. She took the book and she crammed it all into a keynote. All of it. The result was a talk that was, by any measure, impressive, dense, thorough, intellectually rigorous, and it was absolutely blasting out the brains of every audience she stood in front of. She wasn't getting enough referrals. She wasn't getting asked back. No one was booking her workshops, which, if you think about it, makes perfect sense. Like, I spent 2 minutes looking at the outline for her keynote and I could see the problem straight away. Would you pay for a workshop when you've already been given all the information in a keynote? The talk itself was a genuine strain on the cognitive load of the audience. It wasn't a transformation. It was more of an endurance test. People left feeling overwhelmed more than moved, informed rather than changed. Here's the thing that a lot of speakers struggle to accept. Buyers are not paying for knowledge transfer. If an audience wanted an information, they could read the book, they could watch a YouTube video, they can hop onto their favorite AI tool. What they can't get from any of those things is the experience of being in a room with somebody who shifts how they think, or challenges a belief that they've held for years, or sends them back to their desk on Monday morning doing something differently. The most valuable thing a speaker can deliver is not information. It's change, transformation in how the audience thinks, believes, acts, or speaks. That's the product. Information is just the vehicle or part of it. If your keynote is more of a lecture, you're not really in the keynote speaking business. You're more in the teaching and lecturing business. And teaching, I'm sorry to say, generally pays less and books less because it positions you as a resource rather than an experience. Ask yourself this: what does somebody walk away from your talk being able to do, feel, or believe that they didn't before? If the answer to that is they'll know more about X, then you've got work to do. In fact, one of the things that you'll hear very commonly said in the speaking world now is that the age of the information speaker is over. You're definitely going to hear that in an episode I've got coming up next week. Ask any speaker coach, and I mean any speaker coach anywhere, and they will have met this client I'm going to describe for you now. The speaker who sits down in a session or gets onto a prospecting call and says some variation of these words: "I can speak on pretty much anything. Just point me to where the money is." Now, there are two versions of this person. The first is someone who genuinely hasn't done the work of deciding what they stand for yet. They have real expertise somewhere, but they're hedging, listing every angle, hoping that the coach will hand them a shortcut to a successful speaking business with lots of bookings. That's a positioning problem, and that's fixable, very fixable. The second version is a little harder to work with. I encountered this during my time at the Speaker Lab. A speaker came to me with an enormous amount of confidence. I would even say somewhat overinflated ego. Not the grounded kind, the kind that doesn't leave much room for anyone else in the conversation. So he wanted to know where the money in the speaking industry was. And that's what he would speak on. So when I pushed back on his credibility in the AI topic that he was eyeing up, a topic he was interested in primarily because it was trending, he didn't take it at all well. The challenge wasn't welcome. The idea that enthusiasm and intelligence and being a great generalist alone doesn't constitute authority in a subject, doesn't constitute credibility. And these were things that, let's just say, he didn't come to me to hear. And this is the thing about the ego-led speak on anything speaker. The logic feels all right from the inside, like I'm highly intelligent, I research quickly, I speak well, I present well, therefore I can speak credibly on anything. And in a lecture hall, maybe in a keynote context in front of a paying corporate buyer who has done their due diligence on you, no. Because credibility isn't about how smart you are. It's about whether your audience and your buyer believe you have earned the right to stand on stage and say these particular things. That belief comes from your track record, your lived experience, your body of work, your qualifications potentially as well. It cannot be substituted with confidence, however abundant you may be in that resource. The market itself is also less forgiving of topic hopping than speakers tend to assume. I want to give you a real-world example of how this plays out more subtly. I worked recently with a speaker called Courtney Herding, and if you've been listening for a while, you may recognize that name from episode 254. It is called Hot Market Cold Inbox. Well worth a re-listen if this is landing for you today. Now, Courtney speaks in the AI space, a genuinely hot topic, has been for a while, probably still will be for a while to come. Real credibility in the space as well, with her experience and background in AI, and yet the bookings weren't matching the moment. Part of what we uncovered was that her website listed so many different keynote options that no buyer could quickly understand what problem she actually solved or what she specifically spoke about. She wasn't positioned as the person for a specific urgent need. She was positioned more as somebody who knows a lot about AI, which she is. It is a category though, it's not a position. And then came more of a pivot towards wearables. Now, an interesting space, genuinely relevant in the tech sector for product education, but again, not anchored to a valuable problem that a business buyer would feel in their budget. Now, this potentially is another topic in search of an audience rather than a solution in search of a problem. Every time you pivot to chase market trends, you start the credibility conversation from scratch. New content, new case studies, new positioning, new outreach. The speakers who build sustainable businesses pick a lane and they go deep. They may evolve into new topics. They may develop on top of what they have. But the ones who chase trends will spend their careers rebuilding. Versatility is a feature. Vagueness is a liability. And confidence, however impressive, is not a substitute for authority. Now, if you're building a speaking career in the UK or Europe, it is worth being clear-eyed about the landscape because it does look quite different from what you might see when you look across the Atlantic. Now, the association speaking circuit that sustains a lot of American speakers simply doesn't exist here in Europe in the same way. The associations that do exist largely don't pay or don't pay enough to build a business on. Now, you can hear more about the education space in my episode with Jackson Ogunyemi, another live coaching session, and the education space can be very rewarding, but it rarely pays well enough to make a sustainable or successful, comfortable living. We'll be going deeper into the education speaking market in an upcoming episode with Claire Young, who runs a booking agency specifically for education speakers in the UK. So watch out for that one, especially if you're a fan of the UK Apprentice. She was one of the runners-up in season 4. Speaking in the faith sector doesn't really pay any meaningful level, except at the very top of well-known figures with established platforms. There is after dinner speaking, conference speaking, there's more for big names. They get harder to break into. Stand-up comedy even is professional speaking. These can be lucrative, but they often require different skill sets. They can be harder to break into, especially as primary income streams. Which leaves corporate. And for most speakers who want to be well paid and build something sustainable in this market, corporate is where you'll need to look. So if that's the goal, there is one question your positioning has to answer clearly and quickly. Does this talk affect the bottom line? Not adjacent to the bottom line, not philosophically connected to the bottom line, actually demonstrably specifically connected to either making the company money or saving the company money, or ideally both. Why not? Let me give you some examples so this isn't more abstract. Speaking on sales, clear. It's very clear. More revenue in, less revenue lost to poor technique. Speaking on communication, what is the cost of miscommunication or poor communication in an organization? Wasted time, failed projects, legal risks, talent leaving because they feel unheard. That's a bottom line conversation. Now, speaking on motivation and energy is fine, often still in demand in the sales sector particularly, but other places too. But you have to run the line in corporate for people feel more energized, to people perform better, to that performance shows up in output, retention, and results. You have to do that work. The buyer is not going to do it for you. Breaking into corporate requires a topic that addresses a problem the company already knows it has, or at a minimum, a problem that leadership and event bookers would recognize the moment you name it. You don't have the luxury of educating buyers about why they should care about your subject. If they don't already feel the pain, you're not solving a problem, maybe even creating one for them or creating a new subject for them. Now, the transformation piece really matters here as well. Something must be different for the audience by the end of your talk. Not slightly different, meaningfully different. How they think, how they believe, how they act, how they communicate. At least one of those things has to shift. And if you can't articulate what that is and why it matters to the business, you are nice to have. And we'll talk about what that costs you in a moment. But here's something the speaking industry doesn't say clearly enough. Nice to have can still get you booked. I don't want to pretend otherwise, but nice to have will always take second place to need to have, especially when budgets are tight, which they frequently are. Now, nice to have will get cut first every single time. Let me give you something a little more concrete about this as an example. So gratitude. There are speakers who talk about gratitude in corporate settings, and they frame it in terms of culture and well-being and team morale. Great. And look, I'm not dismissing those things, but in the mind of a corporate buyer with a finite budget and a room full of stakeholders to justify the decision to, gratitude is a soft topic. That doesn't mean you can't get booked on it, just means it's a harder job. There's only so much work that framing can do. Some topics, no matter how skillfully you position them, will always sit more in the nice to have column in the corporate world. Now, contrast that with a speaker addressing what happens to your organization if you get left behind in the AI revolution. That's a bit more immediate, visceral, board level pain point. It creates urgency. And urgency is one of the most powerful forces in a buying decision. So when a buyer thinks, we need to address this and we need to address this now, the conversation about budget becomes a very different one. So rather than do we have the budget for it, it becomes, can we find the budget for it? We need this. Must-book speakers are positioned at the intersection of three things: a specific and urgent problem, a credible and differentiated solution, and proof that it works. Remove any one of those and you slide back towards the nice-to-have area. So ask yourself this: if a company had to choose between booking you and not booking you, what would they actually lose? If the answer is vague here or soft or hard to quantify, that's your positioning work that you need to do right there. Now, I want to add something here that does often get left out of positioning conversations, because positioning is usually discussed as if it's purely about topic and market and messaging. And it is about those things, but it's not only about those things. You are part of your positioning. You, your background, your qualifications, your experience, your story or your stories. These are not just color on top of your topic. They are a core component of why someone should choose to work with you over other speakers in your space. Now, here's a way of thinking about it that I find clarifying. Aristotle in ancient Greece identified three modes of persuasion that between them cover everything that makes your communication compelling. Ethos is your credibility, your character, your authority to speak on the subject. Logos is the logical rigor of your argument, your frameworks, your evidence. Pathos, the emotional resonance you create, the connection that you build, the feeling you leave the audience with. Now, here's the uncomfortable truth for anyone who thinks that their positioning is purely about their content. I have seen speakers have their talks transcribed word for word. I watched people essentially do that and lift a whole talk, framework, stories, everything, and go on to deliver them as their own. And it happens more than the industry would like to admit. Now, former bureau owner and speaker coach Maria Franzoni spoke about this on episode 256 of this show, How Professional Speakers Get Hired, the Bookability Formula. And the reality that talks get transcribed and repurposed by other speakers is an open secret in the industry. And yet the speakers doing the lifting always end up with a pale imitation, no matter how good they are, because what made the original talk work wasn't the words, it was the person behind them. But here's what they can never take: the ethos. They can reproduce your logos, your frameworks, your data, your arguments. They can attempt your pathos, your delivery, your emotional beats, your humor. But your credibility, your lived experience, the specific combination of what you've done and who you've been and what you've earned the right to say, that cannot be copied. It isn't in the transcript, it's in you. The speakers who get booked consistently and at serious fees tend to be strong across all three. Their ethos is clear. You understand immediately why this person has the right to stand on the stage and say these things. Their logos is solid. There's substance behind the style, frameworks that hold up, evidence that convinces. And their pathos is real. They make you feel something, not just think something. If your positioning is purely logical, here's my topic, here's my framework, here's my credibility, you're leaving the pathos on the table. And pathos is often what closes the deal. We talked about this a lot with Beth Sherman last time about connection with the audience. People book speakers they feel something about and then justify it with logic afterwards. So as you think about your positioning, think about all three. What makes you credible here? Specifically, not generally. What is the intellectual substance of what you're offering? And what does someone feel when they encounter you, your content, or your story? Now, the market doesn't just buy topics, it buys people with the right topics, delivered in a way that moves them. And that combination, Your ethos, logos, and pathos is yours alone. Nobody else can be positioned as you. Not yet, at least. We'll maybe see what happens with robotics in the future, but at least at the moment, that is the case. So let me bring this all together. The speakers who struggle with positioning the most are almost always making one or more of these mistakes. They're speaking to a market that they've imagined rather than one they've researched. They're delivering information when the buyer wants transformation. They're positioning themselves as versatile when the market rewards specificity. They can't connect their topic to a business outcome that corporate buyers would lose sleep over. And they're sitting in the nice to have column when they should be building toward must book. And this as well, they're forgetting that the person, their story, their credibility, their ability to create emotional resonance is as much a part of the positioning topic itself, regardless of what that little voice of imposter syndrome might be telling you. Now, I'm running a live event on exactly this subject. It's called A Position of Authority, Why Most Speakers Are Invisible and What to Do About It. And if this episode has made you think about where your positioning might be letting you down, this is where we're going to go deeper. We're going to do the actual work, not the theory, the work, on what it takes to move from being a speaker with a topic to being a speaker with a position of authority in your market. Now, the registration link is in the show notes and on my LinkedIn profile, so you can go and register there. And if you're coming, I'll see you there live on Wednesday, the 27th of May. It's going to be 12:30 p.m. UK time. That's 1:30 p.m. Central European time. If you can't make it live because of time zones or whatever, register anyway and you'll get the replay. But if you can, you'll get the chance to sit in the hot seat and punch up your positioning. For now, go and do something worth talking about. And I'll be back next week with an episode that will blow your mind with the fantastic David Newman. Now, if you're not following the show, you might miss it. So hit that follow button. I'll see you next time.